we want to demonstrate the gains from trade using the production possibilities frontier as the basis for demonstrating it. We want to show how your consumption possibilities can exceed your production possibilities using trade. Comparative advantage, which we know to be which of two activities at which you are better than your potential trading partner is the one that you are more better at, has a proper technical definition. Comparative advantage is the ability to produce a commodity at a lower opportunity cost than others. So let us look at a scenario where a labor unit in Jamaica, say, can produce either 2 oranges or 1 apple, and a labor unit in Germany can produce either 3 oranges or 4 apples. And ask the question, which country has the lower opportunity cost of oranges? Well, if it takes 1 labor unit a day to produce 2 oranges, then 1 orange is going to take half a day. And in that half a day, that labor unit could have produced half an apple. So the opportunity cost of each orange produced in Jamaica is half an apple. Over in Germany, a labor unit working for a day could produce 3 oranges. So 1 orange would occupy a third of a day. And if that whole labor unit working for a day could otherwise have produced 4 apples, then in a third of a day, it would have produced 1 1/3 apples. So the opportunity cost of an orange in Germany is 1 1/3 apples. Now here's how you have to think about this. How many apples would the world have to give up in order to get 1 more orange? Well, if the orange is produced in Jamaica, it gives up half an apple. If the orange is produced in Germany, the world gives up 1 1/3 apples. In opportunity cost terms, it's cheaper for the world to produce oranges in Jamaica. Jamaica's comparative advantage is oranges because the opportunity cost of producing an orange is less there than in Germany. Let us do the same exercise to work out the opportunity cost of apples in both countries. We already know that because comparative advantage is comparative, then once we have worked out the comparative advantage of one country, then the other commodity is automatically the comparative advantage of the other country. But we're going to go through the exercise anyway. 1 apple in Jamaica requires a labor unit working for a day, which could otherwise have produced 2 oranges. So 2 oranges represents the opportunity cost of apples in Jamaica. In Germany, a labor unit in a day could produce 4 apples. So 1 apple is a quarter of a day for a labor unit. And in that time, it could have produced 3/4 oranges, 3/4 of an orange. So the opportunity cost of an apple is 2 oranges in Jamaica and 3/4 of an orange in Germany. Germany has the lower opportunity cost of producing an apple. To put it again in a more instructive way, if the world has to decide which is the cheaper way in terms of opportunity cost, which is the cheaper location in which to produce apples, well, to produce them in Germany means giving up only 3/4 of an orange. To produce them in Jamaica requires foregoing 2 oranges. it's cheaper in opportunity cost terms to produce your apples in Germany. So with the lower opportunity cost, Germany has the comparative advantage in apples. Established that Jamaica's comparative advantage by virtue of lower opportunity cost is in oranges and Germany's is in apples. So we start with the assumption that Jamaica is initially self-sufficient. It is producing the oranges and apples it needs for itself. It is producing 2 oranges and 2 apples. If it decides to specialize in its comparative advantage, then it shifts all its productive capacity into oranges, and it can produce 6 oranges. If international trade allows it to trade 1 orange for 1 apple, then 5 oranges and 1 apple become a possibility. Now you notice something remarkable straight away, that there is no possibility to have a combination that is outside of its production possibilities frontier. 5 oranges and 1 apple is not possible without trade. In fact, the best it could do without trade is 4 oranges and 1 apple. Now we see that it is achievable for it to have, not by production alone, but by trade, to have a combination that is not possible from domestic production alone. Let's trade another orange for an apple. Again, we're outside of the production possibilities frontier. And the third one, see, by virtue of specialization based on comparative advantage and trade, that this country can end up with 3 oranges and 3 apples, which is outside of the quantities it could have achieved by producing all it needed for itself. Specialization and trade allows it to consume outside of its production possibilities. The combination at C is greater than the combination at A. And it gives rise to an expansion of the country's feasible set. It now has the possibility of consuming along a feasible set that is outside of its production possibilities. Trade expands the feasible set. This is an important point, so I want to look at it from a different way. Instead of looking at it in terms of where it starts and a chronological sequence to specialization and then to trade, let us make the point by starting hypothetically at the country producing oranges alone. If all productive capacity is devoted to oranges, then, well, imagine a citizen gets up one day and says, fellow citizens, as I've always said, man cannot live by oranges alone. We need apples. How can we have some apples? Well, there are 2 ways that the country can get the apples that it wants. One is by production. To get apples by production, it means taking resources away from producing oranges and devoting them to producing apples. Let's call that the technology of production. So in order to get 1 apple, it has to shift resources away, a sufficient number of resources, which means it will have 2 fewer oranges. That's the opportunity cost of an apple using the technology of production. But there's another technology that will get you apples. And that technology is called trade. That technology is to produce the oranges, put them on a ship, shove it towards Germany, wait for the round trip, and the ship comes back with an apple. And using that technology, then the apple costs only 1 orange. So the way to look at international trade, or trade in general, is to see trade simply as an alternative technology for getting what you want, alternative to getting it by production. And it's a cheaper technology. And that too demonstrates the gains to be had from international trade. To complete this illustration, we want to do the same exercise for the trading partner, Germany. So let us start off with Germany's productive capacity split between oranges and apples in the same way. If all 3 labor units in Germany are devoted to producing oranges, it could have 9 oranges. If all are devoted to apples, at 4 apples per productive unit, it could have 12 apples. And all the production possibilities are represented on the straight line in between those 2 points on the axes. So that is Germany's production possibilities frontier. Let us say that Germany starts with a combination of 1 labor unit producing oranges, so it has 3 oranges, and 2 labor units producing apples, so it has 8 apples. So 3 oranges and 8 apples is its non-trade, self-sufficient starting point. If Germany specializes in its comparative advantage, which is apples, then it would have 12 apples. When it trades, when it engages in international trade at 1 for 1, it is going to ship 3 apples to Jamaica and get 3 oranges in exchange. At 1 for 1, it is moving along a consumption possibilities boundary, which again is outside, is beyond its production possibilities. If it exchanged 3 for 3, it ends up with 9 apples and 3 oranges, which is a larger combination than it had under self-sufficiency. So we have demonstrated that trade based on each country specializing in that commodity for which it has the lower opportunity cost, specializing in its comparative advantage, leaves both countries with more product. This realization that specialization and trade makes both countries better off leads to some surprising and instructive conclusions and undermines a lot of the slogans that people use. Here's a really popular one. Many countries try to promote some version of this. Grow what we eat and eat what we grow. Boy, that sounds like a good thing to do. Why would anyone object to that? Well, it violates taking advantage of the gains from trade. Point A is grow what we eat and eat what we grow. If we want apples and oranges, then we should grow apples and oranges. But we have demonstrated that if you grow oranges and exchange them for apples, you end up with more oranges and apples. grow what we eat and eat what we grow confines you to your production possibilities and prevents you from taking advantage of the gains from trade. What you really want to advocate is not let's forego the gains from trade. What you really want to advocate is grow what you are good at, your comparative advantage, and then trade for and eat what you like the most. That makes more sense. We can use the insight from the calculation of opportunity cost and specialization and trade to identify what are the components of an economy's standard of living, of the standard of living of the people in a country. Like, how much do you get to consume? So, in our example, the citizens of this country get to divide 3 oranges and 3 apples amongst themselves. That represents your standard of living. What are the ways in which we can increase your standard of living? Well, there are only 3. One is if they had more productive capacity, if they had more resources. So if instead of 3 units of productive capacity, they had 4, then given their productivity, they could produce more of their comparative advantage and be able to trade for more of what they want. Having more resources is one element of ending up with more goods and services and a higher standard of living. Another possibility is to have your same productive capacity, but to make it more productive. If each labor unit, instead of producing 2 oranges, if each one could produce 3 oranges, perhaps by investing in capital, perhaps by investing in better technology, perhaps by having rules and regulations that allowed for greater productivity, then in that way, we can end up with a greater level of production, which again allows us to trade for more of what we want. And the third possibility is to have the same productive capacity and the same productivity, but to get better terms of trade. The terms of trade is what does it cost you in terms of what you produce to get what you want, what you are trading for. In the case of our example, what does an apple cost you? In the present terms of trade, an apple costs us 1 orange. But if we could get improved terms of trade, then perhaps an apple could cost us only half an orange. In which case, giving up an orange gets us 2 apples instead of 1. An improvement in the terms of trade allows us to have the same amount of resources, the same productivity, but end up with more. The point here is that there are only 3 ways for a country to raise its standard of living. Either it has more resources, or it raises its productivity, or it gets better terms of trade. There are no other possibilities. If when you hear people talk about economic policy and ways to make the economy grow, if what they are telling you doesn't fit into one of these 3 categories, one of these 3 components, then it's not an economic growth strategy. It is not a route to a higher standard of living. It's just some kind of gimmickry. We speak about this model that tells us how we can get a higher standard of living. So start with the production possibilities, and then specialization, and then trading for what you want. We speak about it in terms of trade between countries, but it applies at all levels. Not only at the country level, but at the regional level as well. Regions within the same country. And can also apply to households, within an economic community. Household, or a single productive unit, has resources, has productivity, and sells what it produces in order to buy what it wants. So the same principle applies. Now we use the example of apples and oranges to make this illustration simple, but this applies to the economy. We're not talking about individual commodities. That the total product of any complex economy, with its literally millions of variations of goods and services, can always be categorized into two components: goods versus services, civilian production versus military hardware, or any other way of bifurcating total production into two categories. So the way in which we have approached this issue is generalizable. But this raises a question. If it is so clear that trade is beneficial to both trading partners, then why are so many people opposed to trade? Why do so many people want to block imports if they're all going to end up better off? Well, we have not said that we're all going to end up better off. What we have said is that the country, the economy, stands to end up with more total product. That doesn't mean everybody in the country gets a piece of that. Consider this. As we allow the economy to shift productive resources from apples into the orange industry, that same thing we spoke about as destroying local industries, well, people invest in and work in those local industries. And it's not clear to them that when their industry is not able to compete on price with the imported apples, say, it's not clear to them that they are going to quickly get re-employed in the expanding orange industry. And it's not clear to them because it's not true. It's going to take, at the very least, some time of unemployment and disruption and loss of income, even if those who are losing out in that structural shift end up moving into industries that replace the income. In other words, this process of the economy's structure, moving from what it is producing before trade to what it can produce after trade, is a process that means that particular pockets of resources, of people, are going to become unemployed. And understandably, those people end up worse off. And since their skills and facilities may not be suited to the expanding industries, they may very well end up permanently worse off. And that represents the locus of the opposition to any expansion of trade. So it's no comfort to those people to say, well, okay, fine, we are all going to end up, the country is going to end up with more goods and services, but those are going to go to other people and us. And so as much as specialization based on comparative advantage And trade is sort of quantitatively advantageous for the whole country in terms of the internal distribution of income and benefits. Some will gain and some will lose. And that presents a problem of political economy. So that is why international trade, beneficial as it is quantitatively, is always opposed by some elements. And elements who know who they are, those that are going to get employed in an expanding industry in a year or two, don't even know who they are to lobby in favor of the expansion of trade. Our takeaway from this section is that, like production, trade is merely another technology of acquisition, and one that is often more efficient in its use of resources than is production.